When a stray dog refused water, we thought she was just scared, until the vet looked into her mouth and time froze. You ever get that feeling something's off before your brain can explain why? That's what hit me the second I stepped into exam room 3 at Willow Ridge Animal Clinic. The air smelled like antiseptic and peanut butter biscuits, and in the corner, lying as still as stone, was a stray German shepherd with the kind of eyes that made you feel watched. Not scared, not aggressive, just aware. I was in scrubs, balancing a clipboard, and thinking this would be another routine intake. She had no collar, no chip, nothing but matted fur, thorns tangled in her coat, and silence. Total silence. No growl, no whimper. She wouldn't even drink the bowl of water I set down. Not a drop. I tried coaxing her with ice cubes. Dogs usually love the sound, but she flinched like I'd offered poison. That's when the unease kicked in. Dr. Marcus Hale, our senior vet and unofficial clinic legend, stepped in from the hall, flipping through charts. He was in his late 60s, twice retired, but couldn't seem to stay away from the job. "Quiet life makes me twitchy," he'd always say. But the second he saw the dog, his expression changed. Without a word, he crouched, gently lifted her head, and pried open her mouth. I watched the color drain from his face like the light had been sucked out of him. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared like he was seeing something that shouldn't be there. Then finally, barely above a whisper, "Get the camera." My name's Ryan. I'm a vet tech here in the little town of Elmridge, tucked between a co-op feed store and a donut shop that smells like heaven. We see our fair share of oddballs, barn cats that think they're lions, raccoons someone insists are just fuzzy dogs, and the usual parade of lost pets. But this shepherd, she was different. From the second animal control dropped her off, something in my gut said don't look away. The officer who brought her in, a guy named Curtis, told us she'd been found sitting in the center of a sun-scorched field behind an abandoned farmhouse near the Ridge Hill Woods. Just waiting. No leash, no tags, no panic. She didn't run when he approached, just turned and stared like she was sizing him up. We called her Mara, short for marooned. It stuck. Mara didn't resist when we checked her vitals. She didn't even blink when we cleaned the burrs from her coat. But water? She recoiled from it every time. It was like she'd been conditioned to fear it. Dr. Hale pulled me aside after the mouth inspection. His voice was low, brittle. "There's something embedded in her upper palate," he said. "It's not dental, not bone, something metallic." My stomach dropped. He leaned in closer. "It looks like it was put there, on purpose." We moved her into the x-ray room. She was calm, too calm. Most dogs twitch, flinch, or at least shift under the noise and light. Mara sat still, didn't even glance at the machine. That silence. It wasn't peace. It was something else. The x-ray revealed something no dog should carry, something placed there, not by accident, but by design. 10 minutes later, Dr. Hale was hunched over the light board in the back room, staring at the x-ray like it had insulted him. I hovered nearby, Mara curled up in a crate behind me, her body unnaturally still. "There," he muttered, pointing to a glowing sliver near the top of her mouth. "Oval, metallic, not a splinter, not a fragment. That's been implanted." The shape was too smooth, too deliberate. No irregular edges, no sign of trauma. Just a cleanly lodged foreign object, reflecting a glint of light that looked more artificial than surgical. And that's when I knew. Mara wasn't just lost. She was put here. "I've worked with dogs for 40 years, Dr. Hale said. I've seen bullets, screws, even nails in the jaw. But this wasn't an accident." I didn't respond. My mouth was dry. We both knew this went beyond a routine rescue. We scheduled emergency surgery for the following morning. Until then, Mara would stay in the clinic under surveillance. I volunteered to stay overnight. I made her a bed of soft blankets in the recovery room, added some shredded paper to block the draft from the vent. She didn't touch the blankets, didn't make a sound, just stared at the door. I curled up on the cot in the corner, light on low, trying to read a textbook to distract myself. I kept glancing over at her crate every few minutes, half expecting her to vanish. She never blinked. By sunrise, I'd had maybe 20 minutes of sleep. I brewed a pot of bitter coffee and checked her vitals again. Normal temperature, steady pulse, clear eyes. But she still wouldn't drink. Dr. Hale arrived early, surgical gear in tow, his face taut. He didn't waste time. We go in, we take it out. No complications. Minimal incisions. Then we find out what this thing is. The surgery was swift. I held Mara still as the anesthetic took effect. She didn't fight, didn't tremble. It was like she knew what we were doing. When Dr. Hale extracted the object, the entire room froze. It wasn't a chip like the ones we use for identification. It was smooth, dark gray and perfectly round, about the size of a fingernail. And when he placed it on the metal tray, it gave off a hum. Not loud, not constant, just a faint vibration that made your teeth buzz if you got too close. "I don't like this," he whispered. "It's not labeled, not chipped, not medical. This wasn't built for any standard database I've ever seen." Mara lay unconscious on the table, but something in the room had shifted. The air felt heavier. Then barely 10 minutes after the surgery, she woke. Groggy at first, eyes glazed, then alert. She looked around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. Dr. Hale offered her water cautiously. She sniffed the bowl and drank, not just a sip, a full drink. Then slowly she looked up at me and, this is going to sound strange, she licked my hand, just once, gentle, like she was saying thank you. "She's changing," I said softly. Dr. Hale nodded, but didn't take his eyes off the chip. Or maybe she's finally free. She drank for the first time, and in that moment I realized we hadn't rescued her. We'd released her. The shift in Mara was subtle, but undeniable. She didn't leap up or wag her tail. She didn't bark or bounce. No, her change was quieter than that, measured, like she was finally stepping out of a fog she hadn't even known she was in. Over the next few days, she grew stronger. Her appetite returned, though she ate slowly, deliberately, as if relearning the rhythm of a normal life. Her gaze followed me now, not in fear or suspicion, but with something close to curiosity. She was watching me, studying me, and not in the way most dogs do. She still never barked, still flinched at the sound of running water, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a flicker of something I didn't dare name. We ran some basic lab work on the chip, blood tests, x-rays, even tried imaging it with more advanced equipment borrowed from a neighboring vet hospital. But it gave nothing back. No serial numbers, no signals, no identifiable tech. It wasn't like any tracker, microchip, or pet implant anyone had ever seen. So Dr. Hale locked it away. Literally, he placed it inside a sealed container, then stored it in a locked cabinet in the clinic's back office. "Until we know more," he said, "we don't touch it, we don't talk about it." Word started to spread around town about Mara, the stray no one could place, the dog who refused water, who drank only after surgery. Clients started asking about her. Local kids stopped by after school just to see her. She'd sit by the front desk, still as a statue, letting them pet her gently. She didn't wag her tail, but she didn't flinch either. "She's got a presence," one woman said as she paid her invoice, "like she knows more than she should." She wasn't wrong. Then everything changed. It was a Thursday. Cloudy. Still. The air felt off all morning. Too still. Too quiet. I was restocking the supply cabinet when the front bell chimed. A man walked in. Early 40s. Wore jeans too clean to belong to anyone who worked outdoors. Boots polished. Shirt tucked just a little too tight. He looked around the clinic, scanning each corner like he was memorizing it. Then he spoke. "I'm looking for my dog." My heart rate jumped. I asked him to describe her. He rattled off her weight, coloring, breed, details that were publicly visible on the town's animal bulletin board. But then he said something that stopped me cold. "She's got a scar," he said, "on her back right leg. Faint, from an old wire fence." He was right. I'd seen that scar the night she came in, but we'd never posted about it. And Mara? She didn't run to him. She didn't wag her tail. She froze. I stepped slightly in front of her. She yours? The man gave me a thin, polished smile. She was part of a project, belonged to my brother. That word again, project. Before I could ask more, Dr. Hale stepped into the room, wiping his hands on a towel. And the man? He looked straight at the locked cabinet. I'll take her now. He said she belonged to his brother, but when she saw him, her whole body turned to stone. I stepped closer to Mara instinctively. She pressed against my leg, trembling, not like a scared dog, but like a soldier sensing an old enemy. Her ears flattened, her muscles locked. Not a sound, not a growl, just pure frozen tension. Dr. Hale's eyes flicked from the man to Mara, then to me. Proof of ownership? He asked, calm but firm. The man didn't hesitate. He reached into his coat too fast and pulled out a folded paper. I didn't flinch, but my fingers curled into fists. He handed it to Dr. Hale, who scanned it with a frown. An adoption form, outdated, generic. No clinic signature, no ID match. It meant nothing. Mara hadn't moved. She was glued to my side, breathing shallow, eyes locked on the man. I'm going to need something more official than this, Dr. Hale said, folding the paper slowly. And if she's part of a project, as you claim, then that brings up legal concerns. The man's expression didn't change, but his smile vanished. He looked at me, then to the back office, the one with the locked cabinet. I swear his eyes lingered on the exact drawer that held the chip. I'll be back, he said quietly. Don't lose her. As he turned, I noticed his boots. Polished, yes, but the soles? Stained. A reddish tint clung to the rubber treads. It might have looked like mud to most people, but not to me. It was red clay, the same kind found in the Ridge Hill backwoods, the same clay that caked the field where Mara had been found. He wasn't just someone from her past. He'd been there. After he left, Mara didn't calm down. She stood pressed against me for nearly an hour, as if waiting for the door to open again. Dr. Hale paced the front lobby, glancing outside every few minutes like he was expecting that silver truck to roll back in. That man, he said finally, wasn't here for a dog. I nodded. He was here for that chip. Later that day, I stayed past closing. My hands mechanically swept the clinic floor, but my mind kept spiraling back to Mara's reaction. It hadn't been fear. It had been recognition. Something deeper. A buried instinct that screamed, run. Dr. Hale joined me around 8. He brought coffee, stale and bitter, and set it down on the bench near the front window. You still thinking about him? I asked. He didn't answer right away. I've been thinking about the chip, he said instead. It wasn't designed to be found. No signature, no registration, no digital ID. Whoever made it didn't want it traceable. I looked at him. She didn't drink until it was gone. He nodded. I don't think it was just tracking her, he said. I think it was controlling her. The silence between us deepened. Mara was curled on her bed, but her ears twitched at every creak. She's not just a victim, I said finally. She's evidence. He looked me dead in the eye. Then we'd better protect her. That night she didn't sleep. Neither did I, and by morning I knew. We weren't just rescuing a dog. We were guarding a secret. The clinic had never felt this quiet. After the man left, we installed new locks on every door, reinforced the back room. Dr. Hale even disabled the clinic's Wi-Fi and switched to paper logs, just in case. Mara stayed close to me, her body pressed so tight against my leg I could feel her ribs rise with every breath. She wasn't just hiding from someone. She was waiting for something, watching the door like it might vanish or explode. She's not coming back today, I whispered to her. But I think I was trying to convince myself. The next morning I came in early. The windows were still dark, the air stale. I brewed coffee, checked our supply drawers, then headed to Mara's crate and froze. The cabinet where the chip had been stored was open. Not broken, not pried, unlocked. The drawer itself sat slightly ajar, like someone had touched it, hesitated, then left it. I backed out of the room, heart racing, and called Dr. Hale immediately. He showed up 15 minutes later, pale and silent. We reviewed the security camera footage from the clinic's hallway. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the screen flickered and went black. 2 minutes later, it flickered again, restored. We checked the power log. No outage, no error, no warning. Just cut. Someone had disabled the system, deliberately. We ran a secondary feed, an old analog cam we used for emergencies, and that's when we saw it. A masked figure, gloved, moving like they'd been here before. They didn't even glance at the supply room or animal cages. They went straight for the back office, opened the cabinet drawer, and left with the chip. Total time inside, 1 minute, 51 seconds. And the worst part, Mara had been in her crate the whole time. Not sedated, not unconscious. Awake. She didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't so much as whimper. She just watched, like she'd seen this before. Later that day, a plain envelope arrived at the clinic. No return address, no postage stamp, just a single piece of paper inside. 5 words. She belongs to us. Don't interfere again. We called the police, reported it as vandalism, but we didn't mention the chip, or the break-in, or Mara. We both knew the truth wouldn't help. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't leave her there. I packed a duffel, told Dr. Hale I'd be taking a few days, and loaded Mara into my truck. We headed north, away from the city, away from Ridge Hill, away from anyone who might be watching. My uncle owned a cabin near Ember Lake. Off-grid, quiet. Cell service barely worked, and the nearest neighbor was miles down a gravel road. It was the kind of place people used to disappear. We arrived just before sunset. Mara stepped out of the truck and sniffed the cold air like it was the first breath she'd taken in years. And when she looked at me, there was something new in her eyes. Not fear, not confusion, but relief. We thought the cabin would keep us safe, but the forest held its own secrets. And Mara? She already knew. The Ember Lake cabin wasn't fancy. 2 rooms, a rusted wood stove, and floorboards that creaked even when no one moved. But to us, it was a fortress. I lit a fire, laid out Mara's blanket by the window, and watched as she explored the space. She didn't sniff around like a normal dog. She moved like someone inspecting a safe house, checking corners, testing doorways, pausing at every window like she expected eyes on the other side. She settled near the hearth, curled tight, ears still alert. But when I sat down beside her and whispered, "You're safe now," she exhaled, a long, quiet sigh, like she believed me, for now. That night we didn't sleep much. Every gust of wind, every shifting shadow outside made me sit up straight. And Mara, she didn't twitch. She watched, unblinking, silent. Sometime after midnight, she moved, slowly, carefully. She stood, walked to the front door, and just stared at it. Then she barked, once, loud, piercing. I leapt up, grabbed the flashlight, and scanned the woods. Nothing. Just trees swaying in the cold wind. No headlights, no sound of engines, no movement. "Mara," I whispered, "what did you see?" But she didn't bark again. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring into the dark. I stayed up the rest of the night, one hand resting on her back, the other clutching the flashlight. At dawn, I stepped out onto the porch, trying to shake the unease, and that's when I saw it. Footprints, human, deep, leading up to the porch, and then away again. No tire tracks, no dropped tools, no boot prints on the gravel drive. Just that red clay again, clinging to the heels. They hadn't driven, they'd walked, which meant they were close. I didn't call Dr. Hale. I didn't call anyone. Not from this cabin, not with signals possibly being monitored. Instead, I packed up our things fast and got Mara in the truck. As I reached to close the passenger door, something caught my eye beneath the porch. A flicker of light, a tiny red blink. I knelt down, pulled it free. A tracking device. smaller than a deck of cards, still active. I felt my stomach flip. They didn't need the chip anymore. They had another way. I smashed the device against a rock, my hands trembling. Mara stood behind me, eyes wide, chest heaving. She hadn't made a sound, but she knew. I loaded the last bag into the truck and drove. I didn't stop for hours, not until the fuel gauge hovered just above empty, and my hands ached from gripping the wheel. Mara sat beside me the whole time, curled up but not asleep. Her ears twitched every few minutes. Her eyes scanned the trees. She wasn't just riding with me. She was listening. For them. She didn't bark. She didn't sleep. And every few miles, her ears twitched like someone was calling her in a voice I couldn't hear. We drove until exhaustion became more dangerous than the people chasing us. The highway narrowed into cracked asphalt, the town signs got smaller, and eventually I pulled into a faded motel tucked behind a gas station with one working pump. The neon sign flickered like it was dying mid-word. I chose a room near the back, far from the streetlights, out of sight. Mara followed me inside without a leash. I didn't turn on the lights, didn't touch the curtains. I just laid her blanket down near the bed, then sat with my back against the door, flashlight still clutched in my hand. She lay beside me without hesitation, her head resting lightly against my leg. Her eyes stayed open, pupils locked on the window. I stayed awake the entire night, not blinking, not moving. And for once, I wasn't thinking about what had happened. I was thinking about what came next, because the men chasing us weren't just after a dog. They were after something they'd lost control of, something they had created, tested, abandoned, and now feared. And Mara? She wasn't hiding anymore. She was adapting. By morning, I made the decision. There was only one person I could trust with this, someone who'd owe me, someone who didn't scare easily. My brother. Eli had spent most of his adult life working with government defense contracts on the tech side, hardware, surveillance, things he never talked about, things he claimed gave him ulcers and paranoia. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year, not since our father passed, but he owed me one. I found a burner phone in the motel vending machine, cheap, disposable. The call connected on the first ring. "This is Eli." "It's me," I said quietly. Silence. Then, "Where are you?" "Can't say. Need a favor." A beat. Then his voice shifted. Low. Serious. "This about the dog." My stomach dropped. "How do you know?" "I've got friends still in. Word travels." "You've been watching me." "They're watching you. I'm just paying attention." He paused, then added, "Do you still have the chip?" Number someone took it. "Then bring the dog. If they're still tracking her, she's the last piece." He gave me an address. Rural, remote, Maryland, middle of nowhere. Then hung up. I looked at Mara. She was already standing. No bark, no growl, just waiting, as if she knew we were going again. We drove for nearly 11 hours through rain, back roads, and long silences. I stopped twice for gas, once for food. Mara refused to leave the truck both times. She didn't even look at the sky. She just waited. When we arrived, Eli's house looked like it had been carved out of the forest, part cabin, part bunker. Motion lights tracked us up the gravel drive. Cameras turned. And at the door, Eli waited. Flashlight in one hand, shotgun in the other. He lowered the barrel when he saw Mara. "She's bigger than I expected," he muttered. "She's smarter than you think," I said. He opened the door and we stepped into the dark. He said, "Bring the dog." But the moment she walked through his door, he backed up like she carried something radioactive. Eli's cabin didn't look like much from the outside, just old timber and flickering porch lights. But inside, it was a fortress. Cameras, jammers, servers humming low behind heavy curtains. The whole place buzzed with static like it was running its own heartbeat. He led us down into the basement. His lab, he called it. It was packed. Workbenches covered in soldering irons, drives, military-grade scanners, and a coffee machine that looked like it could analyze DNA. I sat down. Mara stayed at my feet, tense but calm. She didn't sniff the room or explore. She just watched Eli like she remembered people like him. I told him everything. From the first moment she refused water, to the surgery, to the chip and the man at the clinic, to the tracker I'd found under the porch. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. He just listened. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his jaw. This goes deeper than I thought. You recognize the chip? I recognize the idea of it, he said. It's not just a tracker. It's stimulus-responsive hardware. Next-gen stuff. Behavioral modification, not surveillance. I blinked. You're saying they were controlling her? Not directly, but they could have been influencing her, suppressing instincts, heightening reactions, rerouting sensory input. Think of it like a dog on autopilot, trained to ignore everything except what they told her to do. I felt sick. Why her? Eli glanced at Mara. Because dogs don't sue, and they follow orders. He scanned her with a small handheld device, running it along her spine, neck, legs. Nothing pinged, no signals, no secondary implants. But if she's still reacting, he added, there might be lingering resonance, signal memory. Think muscle memory, but digital. What do we do? He stood up, pulled out a small black band with circuitry in the strap. A dampening collar, he said. It won't block everything, but it'll scramble the signal input. Give her a break. Let her think without interference. We slipped it over her neck gently. She didn't resist. She just sat, eyes steady, as if waiting for the static in her mind to fade. And within minutes, she changed. She walked across the room, sniffed the air, laid down near the heater, and fell asleep. Not a half-alert curl-up, a real full sleep. Her legs twitched, a dream. She's responding, Eli whispered. It's working. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt safe. But instead, my chest tightened. If this tiny collar gave her that much peace, I couldn't stop wondering, what kind of hell had they put her through before? We didn't get long to reflect, because just after sunset, Eli's alarm pinged. 3 vehicles, no plates, 2 SUVs and a van. He turned off the basement lights. They found us, he said, and they're not here to talk. 3 unmarked vehicles, no words, no warning, just headlights and silence, and the sense that this time they wouldn't leave without her. Eli didn't flinch. He moved fast, flicking switches that shut down every light in the house, throwing us into a thick, almost underwater kind of darkness. He reached under a workbench and opened a hidden panel in the wall. Storm shelter, he said. Old maintenance tunnel. Comes out about a mile south. I grabbed Mara's leash, but she didn't need it. She was already at the panel, ears high, body rigid, ready. What about you? I asked. I'll buy you time. Eli, just go. Get her out. His voice cracked, just once. But he didn't slow down. He shoved a black drive into my hand. Everything's on here. Copies of what they erased. Don't let it disappear again. Then he gave me a look I hadn't seen since we were kids, when he used to throw himself between me and the worst parts of our father's rage. He was scared, and that scared me more than the trucks outside. I didn't argue again. I nodded, grabbed Mara, and slipped into the tunnel. It was damp, narrow. Old power lines ran along the walls, long dead. I moved fast, flashlight beam bouncing off rusted pipes and water-stained stone. Mara didn't hesitate. She stayed just ahead of me, occasionally glancing back like she was counting the seconds we had left. Halfway through, we heard it. The sound of a door kicked in. Boots, yelling, not frantic, trained. I pushed harder. My breath rasped against the cold air, and the echo of footsteps grew fainter behind us. When we emerged into the woods, the silence hit hard. No wind, no crickets, just the far-off hum of the generators still running under Eli's house. I scanned the tree line. No headlights, no drones, just darkness and trees. We hiked, fast but quiet, until we hit the old fire road Eli had shown me on a map. A curve in the dirt, a stump shaped like a jagged fang. I flagged down a passing trucker, middle-aged, dusty ball cap, weathered hands. I told him I'd broken down hiking with my dog, and he didn't ask for details. Just told us to hop in. We rode with him for 3 towns before I asked to be dropped off behind a diner. I didn't want to be on any main road. We sat behind that diner for hours. Mara's head rested on my knee. She didn't sleep, but she didn't twitch either. By sunrise, I turned on my phone and checked the news. Eli's house had burned to the ground. No injuries reported, no cause determined. I didn't cry, not yet, but Mara looked at me like she knew something had been lost. And in that moment, I realized we couldn't keep running forever. They burned his house to erase the evidence. But what they didn't know was we were already heading towards something bigger. After the fire, I didn't sleep for more than 20 minutes at a time. Every gust of wind became a threat. Every passing car made my heart knock against my ribs. Mara never left my side. Her body moved with a tension that hadn't been there before, like something inside her had snapped back into place, but wrong. We couldn't hide, not anymore. We needed answers. We needed a trail, and I knew exactly where to start. The man who'd first brought Mara to us, the officer from Ridge Hill County Animal Control, Logan Beck. He was the one who'd found her sitting in that open field behind the abandoned farmhouse. Back then, he hadn't said much. But now, that field, that burned-down home, it had all meant something. I drove through the night, small towns blurred by, highway signs passed like ghosts. I kept to side roads, refueled only with cash, changed vehicles with the help of a contact Eli had introduced me to months ago, someone who owed him a favor. The further I got from the cities, the more invisible I felt. We reached Ridge Hill by morning, quiet, fog lingering over the trees like breath held too long. The police station was small, more like a converted post office than a place of authority. I parked across the street and waited. When Logan Beck stepped out with a coffee mug and a folder tucked under his arm, I crossed the road fast, Mara matching me step for step. He froze when he saw us. "Ryan," he said. I didn't waste time. "You remember this dog?" His eyes dropped to Mara, and for the first time I saw guilt flicker across his face. "She's the one from the field," he said slowly. "I remember. Never forgot." "Then you need to tell me everything. Now." We sat on a bench behind the building. Out of sight, out of range. He sipped his coffee once, then didn't touch it again. "That night," he began, "she didn't act like a stray. She was just there, sitting like she'd been waiting. When I approached, she didn't bark, didn't run, but when I tried to leash her, she growled. Not like she was scared, like she was deciding if I was a threat." He paused, rubbed his hands together like they were cold. "But when I backed off, she followed me, hopped into the truck like she made the choice." I leaned in. "And the farmhouse?" He hesitated, then, "That place was wrong. Empty, no furniture, no power. But there were boot prints in the dust. And in the basement, there was a metal table with restraints bolted to the floor." My stomach turned. "I didn't put that in my report," Logan admitted. "I knew they'd bury it. Sheriff said it was probably some squatters. Told me not to stir the pot." "Who's they, Logan?" He looked around, lowered his voice. "Couple months before I found her, some guy from out of state came around. Said he was with an animal research group. Had credentials. But he didn't feel right." He took a breath. "They were asking about remote properties, quiet places, secluded. The farmhouse was one of 3 they looked at." I felt my jaw tighten. This wasn't random. They'd released Mara for a reason, and she'd never gone back. She wasn't lost, she was released. And when she didn't come back, they sent someone to erase her. Logan shifted uncomfortably on the bench, staring into the steam rising from his untouched coffee. "They never said the word experiment, never used any language that would raise red flags, but everything about them, it was clinical, cold, like they weren't looking for a place to help animals. They were looking for one to hide them." I showed him a photo from Eli's drive, one of Mara strapped to the metal table, wires attached to her head. It wasn't graphic, but it was enough to drain the color from Logan's face. "That's her?" he whispered. I nodded. "Her name's Mara now." He swallowed hard. I can't be the only one they talked to, I said. You said there were 3 locations. Who else helped them set things up? He rubbed his face. You need to talk to Dwight. Who's Dwight? Utility inspector. Works for the county, handles land surveys, grid hookups, infrastructure. If someone needed power or water routed to an off-grid site without drawing attention, he's the guy they'd go through. Will he talk? Logan nodded slowly. He owes me. I'll make the call. An hour later, I was sitting in a rusted lawn chair behind the Ridge Hill Utilities office, while Dwight flipped through an old field log that looked like it had been salvaged from a flood. Mara lay beside me, chewing calmly on a stick. She looked like any other dog, but I knew better. So did Dwight. His eyes kept flicking to her every few seconds, like she might suddenly start speaking. Here it is, he said finally, tapping a scribbled entry. Last fall, temporary grid access, requested under a research exemption code, departmental clearance, no direct name, just a P.O. box address. He turned the log around so I could read it. My breath caught in my throat. The coordinates matched the farmhouse. There's more, he said, flipping 2 pages ahead. Same requester, 2 other sites, one just outside Knoxville, another near a wildlife preserve in North Carolina. Are they still active? He shook his head. No recent meter readings, but that doesn't mean they're empty. I leaned forward. If I go, what should I expect? He looked at Mara, then back at me. If she came from one of those places, he said, expect more like her. We left Ridge Hill as the sun dipped below the tree line. The air was getting colder. I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't moving away from danger. We were heading straight into the storm. I decided to check the North Carolina site first. It was further from the original facility, tucked deep into a stretch of national forest that barely saw human traffic. Fewer eyes, more cover. When we arrived, the road ended in a dense grove of trees. I parked the truck behind a ridge and hiked in on foot with Mara leading. The site was buried behind a curtain of moss-covered rock, a shallow cave half hidden by brush. The second I stepped inside, my flashlight flickered across metal. Crates, hooks, harness straps, and scratched into the stone wall. Hazel, not printed, etched, by hand. I didn't need confirmation. Mara had been here before, and she wasn't the only one. Inside that cave, the walls didn't just hold memories. They held warnings. And Mara? She'd survived what others didn't. The air inside the cave was cold and still, so still it felt like even the forest outside refused to breathe. I moved carefully, flashlight sweeping across rusted steel brackets drilled into the stone. Animal crates stacked in the shadows. Some were broken. Others looked like they'd been sealed for decades. Old wiring dangled from the ceiling like spider legs. Duct-taped sensors, collars, loose tags. But none of it compared to what was carved into the back wall. Hazel, the name was scratched deep, over and over, like whoever did it needed to remember, or couldn't forget. Mara stood frozen at the entrance, nose twitching, tail low. She didn't growl, didn't bark, but her eyes locked on a corner of the cave, and she wouldn't look away. I followed her gaze. A small metal bowl, empty, still upright, untouched by dust. Someone had been here recently. I stepped closer, knees trembling, and beneath the bowl, half buried in the dirt, I found a strip of leather, a torn harness, frayed, but stamped with a number. Subject 5. There had been more before her. I gathered what I could. Photos of the scratched wall, the gear, the identifiers, bagged the torn harness, even took a piece of the etched stone wall. Proof. Back outside, Mara was pacing now. Her energy had changed. Not panic, urgency. Something in her memory had been triggered. She wasn't just remembering. She was anticipating. That night, I drove us to a small town on the edge of the forest. Neutral ground. No signal. No footprints. I contacted a man Eli had worked with in the past. Brian Toller, an independent journalist who had helped break a surveillance abuse scandal years back. Eli once called him the last reporter who gives a damn. We met in a worn-down diner just off the highway. He was already seated when I walked in. Early 40s, sharp features, tired eyes. The kind of man who'd stopped sleeping well after his first story made people disappear. He listened as I laid it all out. Mara, the chip, the man at the clinic, the tracking device under the porch, the fire, the cave, the etched name. I placed the torn harness on the table. He didn't touch it, just stared. "This could be big," he said softly. "Really big. But we need proof. Something indisputable. A name, a signature, a directive." "I've got something," I told him. "A drive from my brother. Data logs, schematics, signal traces." "Good," he nodded. "But even that might not be enough. Not in today's world." He looked at Mara. "I think she's the key." "I'm not using her," I said immediately. "I'm not asking you to," Brian replied. "But a scan, a behavioral profile, an independent evaluation. It supports everything. If she's been altered, it'll show up." Mara, lying quietly under the booth, lifted her head. She didn't seem afraid. She seemed ready. They wanted her forgotten, buried. But now the story had teeth, and for the first time, the world was about to hear her growl. Brian didn't waste time. Within hours, he arranged for Mara to be examined by a trusted trauma specialist. Dr. Liana Cho, a vet who had worked with military K-9 units and rescue dogs pulled from war zones. If anyone could spot abnormal behavior or hidden trauma patterns, it was her. We met her at a private clinic on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. The place was tucked behind a greenhouse and shielded by trees. Unlisted, off-grid, safe. Dr. Cho greeted Mara gently. No fast movements, no loud greetings. She let Mara approach first, and when Mara finally did, cautiously sniffing her palm, the vet's face changed. "She's different," Cho murmured. "Alert, but not reactive. Suppressed responses. She's trained, but not the usual way." Over the next few hours, she performed a full non-invasive evaluation. Scans, neurological tests, stress response triggers. All while Mara remained cooperative, steady, and completely silent. When it was over, Dr. Cho stepped back, arms crossed. "She's been altered," she said. "Not physically, not anymore. But behaviorally, emotionally, something was done, and something was removed." Brian nodded. "Will you put that in writing?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, and I'll testify if it comes to that." We left with a full medical scan, a detailed behavioral report, and a new set of data to cross-reference with the chip logs Eli had recovered. Brian worked through the night in a borrowed safe house just outside the Blue Ridge Mountains. I watched Mara sleep, curled near the fireplace, head resting against her paws. It wasn't peaceful. Not yet. But it was better. Her breathing had slowed. Her ears twitched only when the wind changed direction. Brian's voice broke the silence at 3 a.m. "I've got it." He spun the laptop toward me. A web of files, links, cross-referenced metadata. Everything pointed to one name: Morningside Biotech Systems, a defense subcontractor buried under 3 shell companies. And one project title kept surfacing: Hazel. "That's the name from the cave wall," I whispered. Brian nodded grimly. And this was bigger than just Mara. There were 10 subjects, each listed as test models under a behavioral modification prototype. He clicked on a document marked Classified Internal Use Only. It opened to a table. Subject 7, female, GSD, cognitive flexibility, high, memory override, partial, aggression conditioning, failed, status, unrecovered. "Mara," I said, "she's subject 7. She was never supposed to survive," Brian said quietly, "but she didn't just escape. She adapted. That's what scares them." "And Eli," Brian's face tightened. "He knew too much. That's why they burned everything." I looked at Mara again. She wasn't just a stray. She wasn't just a rescue. She was proof. And now we had the documents, the scans, the video footage, the metadata, all of it. Brian sat forward. "We go public, full release, but we hit every outlet at once. So even if one's silenced, the rest stay up." He stared at the files glowing on the screen. "We don't bury this." He looked at me. "We bury them." The world was about to learn her name, and with it, the truth they buried behind locked doors and scorched earth. Brian's plan was surgical. 10 independent platforms, 3 watchdog sites, a pair of anonymous whistleblower hubs, and one major news outlet with a history of exposing military contracts gone wrong. We had everything in place. The Hazel Project file unredacted, the video from the cave, Mara's behavioral scan, the collar logs, Eli's drive, Dwight's utility records, even the photograph of Subject 7's cage with Mara's distinctive scar visible along her hind leg. No single piece was enough on its own, but together, they formed a narrative even they couldn't control. Brian reached out to his network, uploading mirrored backups to decentralized servers and encrypted drives stored in physical locations. Redundancy was the only protection we had now. And the final touch? A photograph. Not graphic, not dramatic, just Mara, sleeping beside me, her head resting on my knee. A simple image, peaceful but haunting. It was real, and that's what people would remember. As the clock ticked toward noon the next day, we watched the countdown in silence. My hands were shaking. Mara sat at the door, as if she knew something was coming. At exactly 12 p.m., Brian hit send. The files scattered across the internet like sparks on dry grass. One site crashed from the flood of traffic within minutes. But another popped up, then another. And within 15 minutes, Hazel Project was trending. Screenshots, shared files, excerpts, hashtags. People were angry, confused, disgusted, and curious. Most of all, they were listening. Former employees began coming forward anonymously, confirming pieces of the story. A woman claiming to be a former tech on the Hazel Project gave a recorded interview, voice disguised, face blurred, but the detail was undeniable. And through it all, Mara's face kept showing up, again and again. Her quiet eyes, her scar, her silence. Not just a dog, a survivor. By sunset, Brian's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. News crews wanted interviews. Animal rights organizations were already calling for investigations. And at the center of it all, Morningside Biotech Systems. They released a cold, manufactured statement calling the project a defunct behavioral trial, insisting it had been terminated for ethical concerns years ago. They blamed rogue contractors and unauthorized field activity, but it was too late. The fire had caught, but so had the eyes in the dark. That night I woke to a sound, glass, cracking. Mara was on her feet before I was, tail stiff, growl rising low from her chest. I grabbed the flashlight and moved to the window. A shadow bolted across the gravel. Tires squealed in the distance. Brian found a boot print near the rear door. Fresh. We weren't done. Not yet. We thought exposing the truth would end it, but some secrets don't go quietly. Some fight back. By morning, we were gone. Brian had a fallback plan, a cabin owned by a friend, hidden in the upper Blue Ridge. No Wi-Fi, no signals, a place for when silence was safer than answers. We packed in under an hour, 2 cars, 1 switch point, no direct routes. Mara didn't sleep on the drive. She sat in the back seat, eyes on the trees, body tight like a spring. Her collar still blinked with the signal dampener, but something was different. She wasn't just alert. She was anticipating. We reached the cabin by dusk, a true backwoods hideout. No storm shelters, no reinforced doors, just thick pine trees, an old wood stove, and a gravity-fed water line from the mountain stream. Hutch, Brian's contact and a man of few words, met us there. Former intelligence, now retired in the way men like him retire, quietly and always watching. "This place doesn't exist on any map," Hutch said. "It's clean, but it won't stay that way for long." Inside, Brian set up his mobile rig, laptops, drives, signal scramblers. The windows were sealed with blackout tarps. The landline was patched into an encrypted loop. We weren't just hiding anymore. We were preparing. But Mara? She started acting strange, pacing, ignoring her food, standing at the door for hours, her ears never resting. Then one night, she stopped eating. Dr. Cho had said trauma echoes like thunder in the bones, long after the storm passes. But this wasn't echo. It was premonition. She refused to let us near the collar, wouldn't sleep, wouldn't blink. She was waiting for something, and it came. A low hum, software, almost unnoticeable, but wrong. At first I thought it was the generator outside, but then I realized it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from above. A drone, fast, silent, watching. Brian jumped to his feet, pulling blackout curtains tighter. Hutch reached for his rifle. I grabbed Mara's leash. She didn't fight it. She was ready. Back inside, we shut off every light, sealed every exit. The drone circled once more, then disappeared. "They're scouting," Hutch said. "They'll be back, but not loud this time. Silent, surgical." He opened a black case on the table. Inside, tranquilizer darts, tracking beacons, and a shortwave receiver. "If they get her, we need to follow." "No," I said. "They're not getting her." But no one argued. Not because they didn't believe me, because deep down we knew they were coming. We posted shifts, rotating watches every 2 hours. I took the first one. Mara stayed beside me, still and silent, staring at the door with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Not fear, something worse. Recognition. At 3:28 a.m., the hiss of compressed air broke the silence. Gas. "Get up!" I shouted. Brian scrambled for the back exit. Hutch slammed a towel over his face. I grabbed Mara, dragging her toward the bathroom and slamming the door behind us. I turned on the fan, cracked the window. Footsteps inside the cabin. Heavy boots. They were already here. They came to take her, but Mara didn't run. This time she fought. I held Mara tight in the bathroom, one hand on her collar, the other on the window latch. My lungs burned from the gas already leaking under the door. Her breath was shallow, but her body was alert, locked on the sounds beyond the wall. Boots moved through the cabin like they owned it. Fast, silent, precision-trained. I cracked the window wider and shoved out the first aid kit. Brian was already outside, crouched behind the generator. He waved me on. I boosted Mara out next. She landed hard but didn't yelp, just turned and waited. Then I climbed out and we ran, through the trees, down the slope behind the cabin. The air was sharp, cold, full of broken branches and warnings. Behind us, a voice shouted, "She's gone!" Then came the chase. I followed Mara as she darted between trunks, weaving like she knew the woods better than the ones chasing her. Brian trailed behind, breath ragged, hand on the tracker Hutch had handed him hours earlier. Then Mara did something I didn't expect. She turned, cut left, vanished behind a ridge. I skidded to a stop, about to call out, but Brian grabbed my shoulder. "She's flanking them." I stared at him. "What?" "She's not running. She's circling." And then we heard it. A growl, sharp, deep, followed by a yelp. Then 2 barks, short, intentional. Signals. We moved fast, doubled back along the trail she'd taken. There, between the trees, 2 men lay on the ground, unconscious, tranquilizer darts in their necks, and Mara, standing between them. Her chest heaved. Her coat glistened with sweat and frost. But she wasn't afraid. She had waited for them, used the terrain, used herself as bait. "Come on," I whispered, moving toward her. "Let's go." We got to the rendezvous point 5 minutes later. Hutch was already there with the truck, engine running, headlights off. "You made it," he said, flat but relieved. "We're not safe yet," Brian said. "If they sent this team, another's not far behind." We loaded up and peeled off into the trees, the truck bucking over roots and old trails. Mara stayed low in the back seat, eyes still watching the woods. No blinking, no twitching. We reached an old ranger station Hutch had once helped renovate, a fallback shelter nestled between sheer cliffs and guarded by a steel gate disguised as part of the hillside. Inside, we finally stopped moving. Brian immediately backed up all the footage of the takedown, the darts, Mara's behavior. We logged everything. Timelines, gear recovered, audio from the cabin, and then we locked the doors. Hutch took watch on the roof. Mara finally curled up beside me, but this time her head didn't twitch. Her legs didn't flinch. She just breathed. And I realized she wasn't waiting anymore. She was preparing. She'd stopped running, stopped hiding. Now she was waiting for them to come again, so she could end it. The ranger station was built like a bunker, but it was never meant to hold off what we were facing. Inside, we turned the central room into a command post. Maps, drives, radios, printed files spread across a long table lit only by lanterns. Hutch worked in silence, checking perimeters, watching surveillance feeds routed through thermal imaging gear. Brian didn't sleep. He was editing a follow-up story, this time focused on the raid itself, on the gas attack, the tranquilizer darts, the unauthorized assault on a known whistleblower site. We weren't just fighting shadows anymore. We had proof, but we were also out of time. Braith called. She was still in hiding, but she had one last piece we needed, a full, unedited trial log from the Hazel Project, something that had never been released, not even internally. She wouldn't say how she got it, just that she had one chance to get it into our hands, and she would meet us near a supply checkpoint west of the Nevada border. "If you want to bury this thing for good," she said, "you'll need what's on that drive." I asked how long we had. 48 hours, she said. After that, the facility goes dark. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a purge. "They're scrubbing everything," Braith warned. "Files, logs, test samples, erasing every trace they ever touched this project." We made the plan fast. Hutch would handle route logistics and scout extraction paths. Brian would go dark again, set up time-stamped release triggers with journalists, whistleblower groups, and international outlets. I would take Mara to the meet point. But before we left, Brian showed me something, an archived memo pulled from Morningside's internal servers just before they locked down. It was short. Directive: eliminate Subject 7. Confirm termination via collar trace. Fall back to Sector C, a primary asset unreachable. It was dated 2 days before Mara arrived at our clinic. She was never meant to come back, never meant to survive. She was supposed to vanish into the woods. Another failed experiment, but she didn't. She found us. She chose us. That night before the drive west, I sat with her under the stars. The mountain wind cut through the trees, but she didn't move. Her head rested on my leg, her eyes on the horizon. "You're not a project," I whispered. "You're not a subject." She shifted, just slightly. "You're the one thing they couldn't control." And now, she was the key to destroying them. They built her to obey, but she broke the mold. Now she was coming back to tear the whole system down. The road to Nevada was long and dry, stretching like a scar through the desert. I kept the truck off the main highways, hugging service roads and forgotten trade routes. No traffic, no cameras, no signs of life. Mara sat upright the entire drive. No sleep, no rest. She knew. We arrived at the meet point, a rusted fueling station long since abandoned, nestled between two cracked hills. Dust clung to every surface. The sun turned the windows into mirrors. Empty, silent. Brian had chosen it for that reason. Open ground, one way in, one way out. We were early. I parked the truck in the shadow of an overhang and stepped out, scanning the ridgelines. Then Mara moved. Quick, low. Her body pressed to the dirt. She growled, soft but deep. I followed her eyes to the far hill. A figure, walking toward us, slow and alone. Braith. She wore a gray jacket, dust-covered boots, and a hard look like she'd seen more than she'd ever admit. She carried a flat case under one arm and a sidearm clipped to her belt. "You came alone?" I asked. "Not stupid," she said. "Just done running." She nodded at Mara. "She looks stronger." "She is." Braith opened the case and handed me a drive. "Everything's on here. The original logs, directives, signal experiments, conditioning results, even the failed override tests." I flipped through the files on my laptop. There it was, Hazel Trial 7, Cognitive Threshold Report. Inside were logs from field agents reporting her unexpected deviation from suppression cues and recommendations for immediate extraction. But the final entry chilled me. If Subject 7 exhibits signs of independent behavior, initiate protocol. Recovery or neutralization. Do not allow external discovery. They didn't care that she survived. They cared that she escaped their narrative. Braith looked at me. They weren't afraid of what she might do. They were afraid of what she might remember. Before I could respond, Mara stood. Every hair along her spine stood up. I followed her gaze. 2 black SUVs had crested the ridge. No markings, no headlights, but moving fast. Go! Braith snapped. I'll draw them off. You can't. She pulled the sidearm and stepped toward the road. Get her to the backup drop point. Hutch will meet you there. I hesitated, but Mara didn't. She moved, urging me toward the truck. I jumped in, slammed the door, and peeled off down the canyon trail as dust exploded behind us. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Then silence. Mara didn't flinch. She knew this part. She'd done it before. But this time, it wasn't about escaping. It was about ending it. This wasn't just about Mara anymore. This was about every experiment they erased and the reckoning they never saw coming. We tore through the desert, engines screaming as we cut across broken ridgelines and dried-out creek beds. The dust behind us billowed like smoke, and every second I expected headlights to appear in the mirror. But they never came. Braith had bought us time. I didn't know what that cost her. I just knew it couldn't be repaid. Mara sat steady in the passenger seat, her gaze locked on the road ahead. She hadn't made a sound since we left, but the tension in her muscles told me everything. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. We reached the backup drop point, an abandoned survey station tucked inside a dead quarry ringed by stone. Hutch was already there, leaning against a rusted radio tower with his truck idling nearby. I handed him the drive. You got what you came for? He asked. It's all here, I said. Everything. The directive, the data, the memory logs, Braith's copy of the override protocols. He nodded. Then it's time. Time to end it. Brian had been preparing this final release for days. A coordinated media storm built to collapse under its own momentum. It wouldn't just expose Hazel. It would unravel the network that protected it. The names behind the funding, the subcontractors, the shell companies. The politicians who signed off on budgets without reading the fine print. The countdown was already in place. At 6 a.m. the next morning, the truth would hit the world like a hammer, and there would be no walking it back. But they weren't done with us yet. At 3:42 a.m., while we were loading Mara into Hutch's truck for relocation to the final safe house, the ridge above us exploded into headlights. 4 vehicles, full blackout gear. Not extraction, not surveillance. Elimination. Hutch grabbed his rifle and shouted, "Go!" I didn't hesitate. I jumped in, Mara at my side, and we tore out of the quarry in a storm of gravel and smoke. Bullets chewed the dust behind us. Sparks burst from the rock wall as we barreled through a narrow pass. Hutch provided cover, radioing our path to Brian, who was already preparing a fail-safe backup upload. They were trying to stop the release, not in the courts, not online, physically. If they could take us out before the deadline, before the servers went live, they could spin the story, bury it in bureaucracy, drown it in disinformation. But they'd underestimated Mara again. As we cleared the ridge, one of the SUVs swerved to intercept us, but Mara leapt across the seat and slammed her body against the door, knocking the wheel just enough to dodge the hit. We skidded through a break in the trees, shattered a fence, and found the side road Brian had mapped out as an emergency exit, a safe zone. Beyond that, a satellite-linked server farm rented anonymously months ago. Untouchable. As the sun began to rise behind us, casting the red sand in blood-colored light, Mara finally lay down beside me, eyes open, breathing steady. And I knew we'd made it. They tried to silence the story, but by morning, the world was listening. And Mara, the dog they couldn't break, had become a symbol they couldn't bury. At exactly 6 a.m., the server lit up. The final files deployed, raw logs, internal memos, behavioral footage, and Braith's decrypted trial database. It all launched across 12 platforms, mirrored on hundreds more. There was no stopping it now. The Hazel Project had a name, a face, and proof. By 7 a.m., the media storm had turned global. Headlines flooded every corner of the internet. Forums exploded. Hashtags climbed worldwide trends. Scientists, veterans, animal rights leaders, voices from across the spectrum demanded answers. Morningside Biotech was silent for 6 hours. Then came the collapse. A federal investigation, emergency subpoenas, leaked resignation letters. Anonymous testimonies from former contractors filled the airwaves. And then finally, confirmation from a Department of Defense spokesperson, an internal review of behavioral research programs is underway. That was all they said. But it was enough. We were relocated to a secure site provided by one of Brian's federal contacts. Not a bunker, not a fortress, just a quiet home tucked in the mountains, with more trees than roads, and fewer eyes watching. Mara slept for 18 straight hours when we arrived. When she woke, she didn't flinch. She padded to the back porch, sat down and watched the wind roll over the tall grass. She still didn't bark, still didn't beg, still didn't act like a normal dog, but she was free. The collar stayed, at least for now. We didn't know what long-term exposure to the chip had done, or what echoes might still live in her mind. But we knew one thing: she'd made it out, and so had the truth. Weeks later, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a photo. Mara lying on a blanket, sunlight streaming through the window. Clipped to the back was a note in Braith's careful handwriting. She wasn't built to obey. She was built to survive. We never heard from Hutch again. Brian's book hit shelves 6 months later. Subject 7, The Dog That Told the Truth. He donated most of the proceeds to rescue shelters and whistleblower legal defense groups. And me? I still wake up some nights expecting to hear that low hum. Still check the shadows by the window before I breathe easy. But Mara is there, on the rug, beside the fire, watching, alive, unafraid, and still listening. If this story moved you, stick around for more real, emotional, and powerful stories like this one. Subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing what matters.